As Brother Dan said, this is our last lesson this go-around in the book of Deuteronomy. And again, Deuteronomy in 4 lessons is tough. It's tough on me, I'll state it like that. I hope that you've had time to study through there. You could spend a whole lot more time than what we get in trying to get through this in 10 years. I guess the last time we were in this, I was 53. So 10 years ago. But again, there's a lot more to learn than what we could ever begin to cover. There may be more covered about Moses than any other man that's walked the face of the earth other than Jesus Christ himself. When you look at it, we pick up Moses in the bulrushes, being protected by God from those that would kill him. We are now 120 years later. His life was divided into 3 segments, 40 years, 40 years, and 40 years. I started to say my life has been divided, but I don't know what my life's been divided in. He was prepared for a special purpose of God. How is that different from each of us today? We're prepared. God has called us for a special purpose, for his work. It may not be the same as Moses. It won't be the same as Moses. There was only one Moses. Although the scripture this morning that Brother Dan read talks about the similarities of the ministry of Moses and that of Christ, Christ being more perfect. But when you look at Moses' lifetime, Moses was maybe the most significant individual in the history of Israel. Now we look at Abraham and we see the origin of the Hebrew children. We see the beginning of the promises, the covenant. Moses was chosen for a specific time to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. It was a blessing and it was a curse. In leading the children of Israel, first he had to be prepared, and for 40 years he was prepared in the palaces of Pharaoh. He was educated. He was raised up to be a very knowledgeable individual. But then his life was flipped upside down, and he spent the next 40 years leading sheep, which was one of the lowest positions, lowest jobs that was given at the time. And yet there were much lessons in doing so. And those 2 periods, 40 years and 40 years, were in preparation for leading the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. This is the end of Moses' life. These are his last words. And you look at the lifespan of Moses, and we talked about the 120 years, and we think of him leading the children of Israel, but what else did he do during this time? He wrote more books of the Old Testament than any other writer. He wrote at least 5, the Pentateuch, the books of the law, but there are some that believe he also wrote the book of Job, probably the first book that was written of all of the sacred scriptures. When did he do that? When did he have time to do that? Amid trying to lead God's people, who were obviously like us today and very humble and compliant and willing to do what God would have us to do in our lives. It was easy for Moses, right? Well, not only did they rebel against God, but they rebelled against God's man Moses. And so he had to deal with their rebellion time and time and time again. He was prepared for it by God. But still, as a man, there were times when it was a battle. You may think in your own life about different battles that you've had to deal with in trying to serve God as you should. And sometimes it's with ourselves, not others out there. Again, these are his last words. Moses was a great man of God. He's spoken of in the New Testament. Brother Dan read the scriptures in the devotional reading this morning in Hebrews. There are several passages that are dedicated to Moses. In fact, I'd like to read Hebrews 11, 24 through 26, before we get started on our scriptures this morning, on our text this morning. Hebrews 11, 24 through 26. And there it says, "By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, and not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible." We'll stop there. It goes on and talks more about Moses, but he chose a life of suffering over a life of pleasure. That's a choice that we have to look at in our own lives. We have to determine whether or not to suffer. We're told we're going to suffer, aren't we? Those that serve Jesus Christ will suffer. We will participate as he did his death. And so, as his children, don't expect that you won't suffer. Moses chose to suffer. Not only did he suffer with the people, but there were many times when he suffered due to the people. That is how things go in leadership, right? When you lead people, you're going to suffer due to it. Sometimes it's on their behalf, but sometimes it's at their hands. And it is no different in the Lord's New Testament church today. Sometimes you're suffering with the congregation, with every pastor we've ever had, and right up, including Brother Jacob today. They suffer. He suffers with us as we suffer. But too many times, they suffer on account of our own deeds and our own actions. There are too many times that we want to buck, and we want to lead and guide, and we want our will instead of the will of the Heavenly Father above, leading through a pastor. So, all right, all of that's bonus leading into this. Again, these are his last words. He didn't focus on his accomplishments. Very different than politicians today. What do you hear out of their mouth? I did this, I did that, I did that, I did that. Now, when you look at what they have to say and they're boasting, most of the time you'll find they actually did the opposite of what they're claiming. It has hurt you instead of helped you because their focus wasn't on what God wanted, but it was on what they desired and wanted themselves. So Moses, very different here. He's ending his life. He's coming to this time, not eulogizing himself ahead of time, but he's speaking to the children of Israel and preparing them for what's to go forward. Now, among that are some harsh words, some prophecies about how they're going to act. We are people living in the flesh, dealing with the flesh, and the sin oftentimes causes us to, or yielding to sin, to the desires, to the temptations, causes us to do things that we shouldn't do. So this is the message that he gives to them in these chapters, chapter 31, 2, 3, and 34. The last 34 is a charge, actually, to Israel, a praise of God, and then a charge to Joshua. Let's begin chapter 31. And Moses went and spake these words unto all Israel. And he said unto them, I am 120 years old this day. I can no more go out and come in. Also the Lord hath said unto me, Thou shalt not go over this Jordan. The Lord thy God, he will go over before thee, and he will destroy these nations from before thee, and thou shalt possess them. And Joshua, he shall go over before thee, as the Lord hath said. Now, we'll pause there. Moses begins his final message to the children of Israel. We've covered several messages here in Deuteronomy. Some of them were the representation of the law to the children of Israel. There were the cursings, and there were the blessings that were given. Along with that was a constant reminder, and we're going to get some of that again today in this, of the greatness of God and his deliverance and protection of his people. A reminder of what he's done in the past, looking to what he will do in the future. These were for Israel. He said unto them, I am 120 years old this day, can no more go out and come in. What's he mean?
Well, they were fixing to cross into Canaan.
Okay.
And God had already told him you can't go in there.
Can't go into Canaan.
He can no longer perform his daily duties that he needs to do.
He's an old man. Again, there were none his age. At this point, Joshua and Caleb certainly were much younger than Moses was. And so he was an old man. And yet, when in 34 and verse 7, it says, Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. So his eyes work still good. And there are some people that, even at a late age in life, their eyes are still good. Mine are not. But what's this mean, nor his natural force abated? Now, he didn't have the strength that he had before. Have you ever seen an older individual that, they may not be able to bench press 250 pounds, but it did not mean they didn't have energy, that they didn't have vigor, that they didn't have that strong inward motivation and desire to do what needed to be done. Too oftentimes as we get old, we get tired, and our focus tends to fall away, and we don't have that vigor to continue to do the things that need to be done.
There's a difference, though, in desire and vigor and ability.
Yeah. Yes. Very good. So, this is the stage that Moses is at. As Brother Homer said, thou shalt not go over this Jordan. So, you're not going to go in. And why was that?
He's disobedient the second time.
Yeah, he was disobedient. He smote the rock the second time. Not giving. It was in rebellion to God. Now, it was out of anger toward the children of Israel, but God gave him instructions, and he didn't follow them. Just like you and I oftentimes are given instructions from God in his holy word as to what our life should be, what we should do, and oftentimes we refuse to do it. We choose instead to choose things that please the flesh. So, in his anger, Moses struck the rock, not once, but twice, showing the wrong indication to the children of Israel. Verse 3, the Lord thy God, he will go over before thee. And you're going to see that stated several times. He will destroy these nations from before thee. You'll see that many times. Thou shalt possess them, and Joshua he shall go over before thee as the Lord hath said. So this is Moses speaking to the children of Israel. Who's going to deliver them? Who's going to lead them over? Going in before. Who's going to destroy the nations that are there? It is God. Who fights our battles today? God. Our righteous battles. Now, when we're fighting on our own, he's not there. When we choose to go our own way, He's not there. And in all likelihood, He's not going to protect us because we're out of His will. Here, Moses, this is the end of his time. He's not going to go over, but God hasn't left them without a leader. Who's that leader going to be? Joshua. Leading under the guidance of God. So ultimately, God is the leader. Joshua is handpicked, is chosen. Now the people, when they saw, they may have looked and said, Moses chose Joshua. I don't know. But the scriptures tell us that God chose Joshua. Could have been Caleb. For whatever reason, God knowing chose Joshua. And certainly, when you go through, continue to study, you'll see that Joshua was the right man at the right time for the children of Israel. By the hand of God, did great things. So, Joshua would go in. They would possess the land, just as God had said. Verse 4, and the Lord shall do unto them as He did to Sihon and to Og, kings of the Amorites, unto the land of them whom He destroyed. Now, that reference, a reference to that goes back to Deuteronomy 3:21, when they came up against Og and Sihon. Those kings came out to meet the children of Israel, to go to battle against them, and God delivered the children of Israel against them. Against their trained armies, against their prepared armies. God was the one that defeated those kings, those nations. We go on to verse 5. And the Lord shall give them up before your face, that ye may do unto them according unto all the commandments which I have commanded you. Now, he's here talking about them going into the land. He gives them an example of God's taking care of them in the past and bringing it forward to the future and saying, just as with Og and Sihon, that the Lord will give these people up, that He may do unto them according to all thy commandments, which I have commanded you. Did that happen? We're looking forward. Backward. We're forward from there, looking backward at it. Did that happen? We saw it time and time again where God gave them victory in the land of Canaan.
When they were in His will.
When they were in His will. They came up against a mighty fortress. This is jumping ahead. Jericho. It's indicated that the walls, and I forget the measurements, but it was, am I not wrong, it was wide enough where they raced chariots, they had chariot races on the tops of the walls. I thought the scripture had it. Babylon? Okay. All right. Well, anyway, it was a great and fortified city. Many of the cities in Canaan were great and fortified cities, where they were almost impenetrable. Jericho was certainly an example of that. How many people did the Israelites lose in that battle? There's no indication there's any loss. Did they defeat them militarily? It's the hand of God. God brought the walls down. We think of tumbling over, but sunk. All indication is they sunk into the ground. And in fact, I think they've got archaeological excavations that indicate that. They sunk.
Which completely nullifies the scientific community who says, well, they're marching around weakened the walls and they failed.
That's right. That's right. Their marching around must have weakened the ground. Because the walls actually sunk. And yet, a little bit outpost like Ai, Israel was severely defeated. What was the difference? It was God. It is no different for us today. When we move forward in our own power, leaving God out, then we are subject to defeat in our lives. When we're moving according to His will in our life, what He wants out of us, then we'll be victorious. He guarantees that we are victorious.
Since you mentioned I,
Yeah,
that's a good lesson to us as a church. One man caused their defeat.
that's right.
One man's disobedience
Yeah.
caused their defeat.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, we sometimes think, well, what I do is not that important. What you do is very important. Each one of us are extremely important in the work of God, and we need to be focused and doing what God would have each of us to do in His work, according to His will. Well, anyway, I can say more about that, but all right. Verse 5, and the Lord shall give them up before your face, that ye may do unto them according unto all the commandments which I have commanded you. Deuteronomy 7, 2 through 5. Are those commandments? Deuteronomy 7, 2 through 5. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them, that thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them, neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son, for they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. But thus shall ye deal with them. Ye shall destroy their altars, and break down their images, and cut down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire. So this was the command that was given to them by the Lord God through Moses, instruction for going into the land. And so when we look at this verse here, verse 5, and the Lord shall give them up before your face, that ye may do unto them according unto all the commandment which I have commanded you. That's their instruction. And when they followed that, they were safe, and they followed God. But as they veered away from it, which they did multiple times, they made pacts, they gave in to many that were in the land, and because of it, they were troubled through much of their time in the land. The Philistines and many other people influenced them, brought their gods in. They struggled with them. And they suffered many defeats due to it, their rebellion. Now, here, these are promises of God. Verse 6, you're going to see this stated many times in these verses. Be strong and of a good courage. Fear not, nor be afraid of them. Why? For the Lord thy God, He it is that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Did God ever fail them? In all the time in the land, God didn't fail them. The failures were due to what? Their disobedience. Their turning away from God. Their desire to serve other small g gods instead of the God Jehovah. In all things. And that's where we struggle, is in all things. We want to compartmentalize our lives. You can't compartmentalize God. In everything that you do. In every way that you walk. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to work, our lives should be focused first and foremost on God and pleasing God. How do we do that? Well, oftentimes it's by serving others. We serve God by serving others. Doing good deeds. Doing what God would have us to do in our lives. Sometimes I'm just a patoot. You can talk to Cindy later on if you need some validation. I know many of you don't think I am. I could be wrong. We can be sort of ornery in our flesh. Driving down the road. Others may not see it, but how many times do you get angry at others as you're driving along? you get hit a slowdown and somebody starts shooting up the side and you want, I used to do that all the time. I would creep right up on the car in front of me, nervous because I was afraid they'd hit their brakes suddenly and I would hit their back end. At some point, I decided to stop doing it. There was no reason for me to anger myself. I wasn't harming them. They were going to go on up and get in front of me just that much further up. And bottom line is, how do you know they don't have a wife expecting and they're trying to get them to the hospital? We make judgments about things and events, and we need to lay it aside. And that's just an example, but we can oftentimes carry ill will toward other people, not recognizing that ultimately God is in charge of all things, and God, he even states here, vengeance is mine. God's, not mine. So, we need to make sure that our Christian attitudes come forth at all times. And the best times for others to see our Christian attitude are those times when the natural response to the flesh is to respond badly. And others look and say, wow, that person is different. They exhibit something different than the rest of the world. Now in a day of road rage, in the day of people trying to make themselves famous or infamous in some terrible fashion, like the shootings. We are a different people. We need to walk differently. Our attitudes need to be different. All right, spending too much time. Be strong and of good courage. Why? Because of God. Fear not, nor be afraid of them. Why? Because of God. For the Lord thy God, he it is that doth go with thee. He will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. God proved himself faithful all the way through Israel's history, even up to today. Now you may look at Israel and you may say, well, you look at the Holocaust and many other things. Well, sometimes God chastens his people. And was all of Israel saved? No. But they were still special people. God chose the nation of Israel as a special people. Not all of them answered the call. God chose man as a special creature, a special creation, put in him soul. Why did he do that? Why did he choose Israel? Well, we don't understand all of God's choosings, but it doesn't change the fact man is special, Israel a special nation, even though many rebelled. The New Testament church is a little bit different. Why? They're all saved. They're all saved. Each of us that are members of the New Testament church have made a profession of faith. Israel, it's been said before by others, Israel really represents man. And God calls all to be his. And it's given to us as a choice. From his creation in the very beginning. It's given as a choice. And some have answered the call to salvation. But within his New Testament church, we are, as Peter describes, a peculiar people. Because we have made that profession of faith, placed our faith and trust in him to guide us. Verse 7, Moses called unto Joshua and said unto him, in the sight of all Israel, be strong and of good courage. We've heard that before. So this is Moses to Joshua. And said unto him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and of good courage, for thou must go with this people unto the land which the Lord hath sworn unto their fathers to give them, and thou shalt cause them to inherit it. Now, did Moses want to go into the land? Yeah, he pleaded with God. But because of his sin, he was not allowed to. However, here, understanding the prominence of God and the provision of God, Moses here is focused on God and his will, and the nation of Israel, and the man that would step in afterward. We have had many pastors here. Not a ton, but many. And you'll find that, by and large, the majority of them, even once they left and went elsewhere, still carried a burden and prayed for the growth, spiritually, of Brookside. That Brookside would prosper in the things of God. Many members that have been here come back from time to time to reacquaint and revisit, but also indicating their desire to see Brookside do great things. In the end, it's upon us as God's people here to yield our lives to God to accomplish the will of God. His desire was to see Israel succeed in what God would have for them. So here he gives a charge to Joshua, tells him, be strong and of good courage, for thou must go with thy people into this land. Yeah, it's one of those things where you think in the back of Moses' mind, yeah, I know what it's been like trying to lead these rebellious people, these stiff-necked people, and hoping, knowing that Joshua's going to run into it, but hoping the best for the outcome, based on them following Joshua as he followed God. Be strong and of good courage. Thou must go with this people in the land which the Lord hath sworn unto their fathers to give them, and thou shalt cause them to inherit it. It would be Joshua's job to finish this portion of the work that was to be done. And Paul talks about it in the New Testament in establishing his New Testament churches. So Apollos watered. Let me get back up. Apollos planted. I watered. Does anybody remember?
Paul planted, Apollos watered.
Thank you, very good.
God gave the increase.
Yeah. So it takes the work of many to accomplish the work of God. Verse 8, the Lord, He it is that doth go before thee. He will be with thee. He will not fail thee, neither forsake thee. Fear not, neither be dismayed. As you see this charge, were there times when Israel fell down in these things? There were. There were times when they looked to God as their provision, but there were other times that they looked to themselves, just as they did when they first looked into the land with the 12 spies and saw the giants. They were looking unto their own strength and not the strength of God. And again, we as God's people oftentimes are guilty of that. We live in a big city, don't we? Yeah. There's, 3.5 million in the metropolitan area, depending on what dimensions, and we can't do it. Well, who says we can't do it? Whose victory is it? It's God's. We're just commanded to do. We look at different things that the church, we have a prayer tent, and some may question, some may doubt. But it's not us to deliver results. It's ours to do as God would lead us to do. Verse 9. This is a charge to the priest, and Moses wrote this law and delivered, and this is the things that he said here, this law, and delivered it unto the priest, the sons of Levi, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and unto all the elders of Israel. Moses commanded them, saying, at the end of every 7 years, in the solemnity of the year of release. Now what year is that? Jubilee, every 7th year of release. Solemnity of the year of release, in the Feast of Tabernacles, So we have a particular time, that happens to be the 15th day of the 7th month of the year, and it was a feast of 7 days. In that time frame, then they were to go back and remind the people, reread the law.
Jubilee's 50 years.
Jubilee is 50 years.
It's
Yes.
the year after the 7 sevens.
7 sevens. The 7th is the Sabbath here. Is the Sabbath here. Yeah. All right. He commanded them at the end of every 7 years, in the solemnity of the year of release, in the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Israel is come to appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose, thou shalt read this law before all Israel in their hearing. Gather the people together, men and women and children, and thy stranger that is within thy gates, that they may hear, that they may learn, and fear the Lord your God, and observe to do all the words of this law. There are 4 statements here, 4 pieces of instruction. They are what? Well, yeah, and when you include that, there's actually 5. Gather the people together, and we're instructed to do that as God's people. Gather together. And then what? That they may hear, and then learn, and fear, and observe. And I think those are in a particular order because that's the progression of it. You have to hear. You know, you have to open God's Word and you have to look at it. You've got to study. That's hearing. But the intent is to learn. To learn and to, what's the result of learning when it comes to things of God? Fear. Yeah. Fear, respect. And I think there's an element of fear in the sense of God is a mighty God. He's a God of awesome power, authority, and judgment, and righteousness, and applied to a sinful man. That is a scary thing, but also respect for God. Understanding that God is a beneficial God. For those that place their faith and trust in Jesus Christ, He is our Father in heaven, a beneficial Father who wants only good for His people. And that was the children of Israel, and that is us today. Fear God, observe to do all the words of His law. Observe is what? It's not sitting there watching. Observe to do, doing. James talks about that. Be ye doers of the word and not just hearers only. And that's typically where we tend to fall down is we will hear, let it go in one ear and out the other, and we go back to our ways. That's what Israel was guilty of many, many times over and again. I did not anticipate being this long to this point. Verse 13, and that their children, so it's not just the people, but they were instructed to teach their children. And you go back to Leviticus, you'll see there, stressed many times, that they were to instruct their children, to teach them the right things to do. Now, just because they instructed and taught them, did that mean their children would do the right things? No, they have their own will. But they will not, they absolutely will not, unless at some point they hear, they learn, they fear, and commit to observe and do those things. Now, most of the time, the direction we take in our life begins at a very young age. There are those who are saved later on in life, but not a lot. And so it's very important that we focus on those that when they're young, when they're pliable, before our education educational system has gotten hold of them and perverted their minds, deny Christ, deny Genesis account of creation, deny the true God of heaven, instead of all the little g gods that they want to equate. They need to learn at a young age. From there, they have a choice to make. For those who want them to make them when they're young, you're not giving them a choice. Because they'll go choose to do other things. So, all right. Verse 14, and the Lord said unto Moses, behold, thy days approach that thou must die. That sounds ominous. You know, for some of us, we're getting closer and closer to that age where we must die. It's appointed unto man once to die. Moses, a great man of God, 120 years old, his time was not just coming, but it was there. It was imminent. He was about to die, and he knew that. I don't know when I'm going to die. It could be today. I may not step down from trying to teach this lesson. It could be 20 years from now. It could be more. I don't know. I don't have any idea. But with the life that I've been given, I need to focus on the things of God and do what God would have me to do. Because once I'm dead, my opportunities are gone. And so are yours. You know, if you're waiting for some magical time in your life to do what God would have you to do, it's not going to appear. Take the day you have today. You're not guaranteed tomorrow. Moses here, about to die. Behold, thy days approach that thou must die. Call Joshua and present yourselves, Moses and Joshua, in the tabernacle of the congregation, that I may give him a charge. And Moses and Joshua went, presented themselves in the tabernacle of the congregation. And the Lord appeared in the tabernacle in a pillar of cloud, and a pillar of cloud stood over the door of the tabernacle, indicating the presence of God. And the Lord appeared in the tabernacle, and the Lord said unto Moses, behold, verse 16, behold, thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, and this people will rise up and go a-whoring after the gods of the strangers of the land, whither they go to be among them, and will forsake me and break my covenant which I have made with them. Now they are on the west bank of the Jordan, getting ready to go in. And God is giving Moses and Joshua charge and the children of Israel. What's the Lord saying here? That's right. That's exactly right. This is not your normal charge that we think of, before going in. We might be in celebration. We might be in trying to build each other up. But here, he's going to speak some truths to them that are important for them to understand and to guard against. But in the end, God knows those things that will happen. There is the foreknowledge of God. There are things that are determined by God, and there's foreknowledge of God. They're different. And I won't say anything more about that. At least right now, not now. He says here, they're going to break my covenant which I've made with them. Verse 17, then my anger shall be kindled against them in that day, and I will forsake them. And I will hide my face from them, and they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, are not these evils come upon us, because our God is not among us? Now, in their statement, who are they blaming for it? God. God left us. Is that not a constant complaint of people today? God left us. Well, you left God. You went after your own ways. And now you're suffering because of it. He's going to go on in this chapter, and he's going to talk about God using other nations to punish the children of Israel. Did God turn the hearts of those nations to evil? No. The nation of Egypt was evil. The nations in the land were evil. But God had a protective barrier around his people, but when they rebelled and refused God, what did he do? He lifted and what?
Lifted the barrier.
He lifted the barriers. And he allowed others to come in. Now, those other nations that were evil, did God bless them in it? No, we've been studying on Wednesday nights about how God brought his vengeance against those nations that went up against Israel. But don't think that we as God's children, again, we are children of God, we are his, we are punished when we stray away from God. And oftentimes it's through others. And God lifting that barrier, not God bringing it on us. There are times when I do believe that God directly brings his wrath upon. But oftentimes it's the use of others, who then will also suffer for their evils that they've carried out. Verse 18, and I will surely hide my face in that day for all the evils which they have wrought, in that they are turned unto their God, other gods, small g. So again, he's explaining here, why? Because you turn to other gods, I will turn my face and not be your protector. Now therefore, write ye this song for you, and teach it the children of Israel, put it in their mouths, that this song may be a witness for me against the children of Israel. For when I shall have brought them into the land which I swear unto their fathers, that floweth with milk and honey, and they shall have eaten and filled themselves and waxen fat, then will they turn unto other gods and serve them and provoke me and break my covenant. Did these things come to pass? Yeah, again, we've been studying many of these in our Wednesday night service, Brother Jacob took us through. And time again, they turned from God and his benevolence and his provision and his protection. And they turned to gods that were no gods. They could not do a thing for them. Yeah.
This is a very good picture of God's foreknowledge.
Yeah.
He knew these things would happen.
Yep.
He didn't make them happen. He knew
That's right.
they would happen.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
This is also telling us, at least I see it this way, that every generation has to decide for themselves to obey or rebel.
That is true. Every generation, every individual. Yeah. Mom and dad is not responsible for child. When child leaves the home, they have to determine for themselves what they will do with God, with Jesus Christ. What path they will follow, whether they're serve or not serve. And again, it's spoken of throughout the scriptures that we've been studying. And again, here, it's actually prophesied here by the mouth of Moses to the nation of Israel. This is what you're going to do. Now, was that their whole existence? No, there were good kings. There were times when they turned to God and they placed their faith and trust in God and they served God as they should. But there were many, many, many more times when they rebelled and chose the God who did these great and wondrous miracles that they reminded themselves of. That they would turn and pervert themselves to these images, these idols, to other gods. And it is no different today. Too many times our focus becomes things outside of Jesus Christ and what he would have of us, and we focus on material things. Those idols were material things. Is it any different than when we place prominence to material things of this earth? It's not. We're serving other gods. We need to get our priorities straight, our priorities right. And with that, I'll pass on.